If you're a fan of Led Zeppelin, I think you're going to enjoy what we have for you here today. If you follow this channel much, you know that what we do is we go back in kind of history, 60s, 70s, 80s, and look for old newspaper articles, concert reviews, record reviews, that kind of thing. But every once in a while, we come across these really cool articles that are more kind of a day in the life, and rather than giving you opinions about something, they just kind of give you a view into the world of a particular band or artist. And this is one of those articles, and it's really cool. And I don't know that it really sheds any light on anything, especially if you're a Zeppelin fan. There won't be anything super new in here, but it is still interesting reading what people had to say back then, and these little peeks into the world of Led Zeppelin. So anyway, I'm going to share this with you. Hopefully you'll find this interesting. And anyway, so let's jump into this. This is from the Brayton Herald. This is June 3rd, 1977. And it says, heavy metal music on tour, traveling with the Led Zeppelin. Now, to put this in context, in March of 76, that's when the album Presence was released. And so that would have been the most recent studio album that had been put out by Led Zeppelin prior to this article. All right, here we go. New Orleans. The common and the elegant, it's New Orleans, and it's also Led Zeppelin on tour. This ethnically exotic city, it has good restaurants and bad strip joints, is probably the perfect place to join the 8th tour in progress of Led Zeppelin, the British granddaddy of the heavy metal bands, the group that statistics proclaim the most popular rock act in the United States. During this particular weekend in New Orleans, the members of Led Zeppelin, lead guitarist Jimmy Page, singer Robert Plant, bass keyboard player John Paul Jones, and drummer John Bonham were ensconced on the oh-so-tasteful Maison Dupuis on Toulouse Street. It is one of their headquarters hotels, part of a touring pattern that has them staying in a single city for several days and flying in their private Boeing 727 to individual shows. On Saturday, the Zeppelin entourage, sans Plant, Page, and Jones, who have gone to Dallas for a Bad Company concert the day before, begins gathering in the Lautrec Lounge in mid-afternoon prior to departing for a show in Houston, Texas that evening. And to put that in context, this would have been the Burning Sky tour for Bad Company. And of course, they were friends. I mean, you know that Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers later on put the band The Firm together. So, and Paul Rodgers, of course, from Bad Company. Okay, drummer Bonzo is ridding himself of the vestiges of a morning after headache by drowning a... scrolling to the top, milk and bourbon concoction created by the bartender. Bonzo is sporting red socks, which he will wear on stage later that night. He claims they are his only pair. That brings chuckles from Zeppelin tour manager Richard Cole and various members of the road crew. They like to do that, make each other laugh. And the jokes and jibes are delivered in a blend of Cockney and rock slang at times almost impenetrable. The boys then pile into 4 limousines and head for the New Orleans airport. A small knot of Instamatic-toting teenagers waits near the blue and white Zeppelin plane, which sports Zeppelin's Icarus logo. Shortly before takeoff, the going to the gig party begins. Stewardesses dressed in jeans and black t-shirts dispense blenders brimming over with strawberry daiquiris. One is hard-pressed to make it to Houston sober, and an array of food is spread out on the bar. 2 women are along for the ride. No one knows their names. They're this evening's, quote, dates for a couple of the road crew members. Groupies in endless succession appear on this tour, and they are generally held in contempt. The plane stops briefly in Dallas to pick up Plant, Page, and Jones. The members of Bad Company stroll down the aisle to say hello, then quickly depart. A dark-haired young woman from Dallas, a former girlfriend of one of the Bad Company members, gets on the plane and stays on. Tonight she is the, quote, lady of a major rock star. In Houston, the plane is met by another set of limousines, and the Zeppelin party is taken with a Houston police motorcycle escort straight inside the summit. It is time for Led Zeppelin to go to work. Led Zeppelin hasn't toured the United States since 1975, when Plant was severely injured in an auto accident. No one was sure if Zeppelin would be able to tour again, so this tour has been something of a rebirth. Page is the core. perhaps the heart of Led Zeppelin. He's 32 now. Before he was 20, he was one of the most highly regarded session guitarists in England. The group's name is a metaphor for its music, of course. Definitely heavy metal. But the story goes that, quote, Led Zeppelin was suggested by The Who's Keith Moon, who figured that the group would go over like a lead balloon. No, make that Zeppelin. The LED spelling was supposedly a concession to American pronunciation. Here, Led Zeppelin, L-E-A-D Zeppelin, would always have been Lead Zeppelin. This time out, the fans are hearing a more subtle Zeppelin whose music is full of technical virtuosity and delicate nuances. Zeppelin's set is 16 songs long with 2 encores, including such favorites as, quote, The Song Remains the Same, the title track from the Zeppelin movie, No Quarter, Kashmir, and of course, the classic Stairway to Heaven. Bonzo does a 12-minute drum solo on Over the Top. Now, just to put this in, to clarify this, Over the Top was a song, it was basically Out on the Tiles from Led Zeppelin 3, and they just played the beginning of Out on the Tiles, and then what would happen after a few bars is that John Bonham would just go into his drum solo. And so anyway, and they called it Over the Top. So when Robert Plant would introduce the song, he would introduce John Bonham, and then he would say Over the Top, and then they would begin to play this. Although again, what it was Out on the Tiles with a massive drum solo in the middle. Not only does he get away with it, but Plant manages to get 3 roars of approval from the crowd at the end, saying John Bonham, John Bonham, John Bonham. This while wringing his hands metaphorically and grinning at Bonzo. Jones, on stage and off, is on the subdued side. His infrequent comments laced with irony. His musicianship is impeccable. Page is considered by many to be the best guitarist in rock, and he makes a strong case for himself. Clad in a white satin suit decorated with poppies and dragons, his double-necked guitar glowing with the color of laser lights, Page plays a riveting, lush lead. He sparkles during an acoustic set which includes White Summer. It is perhaps Zeppelin's subtlest, most surprising moment. Now, White Summer, this is basically a little guitar piece that he'd originally done with the Yardbirds. And if you listen to it, it's really interesting because every once in a while in the song, you hear little glimpses of Over the Hills and Far Away. You kind of almost expect him when you're listening to it. You hear almost the beginning of Over the Hills and Far Away, but and apparently the idea or some of the riffs from Over the Hills and Far Away, this was kind of Over the Hills and Far Away is kind of a take on White Summer. And then what would happen is he would play this little White Summer piece, and then it would go into Black Mountainside, which is actually from Led Zeppelin's first album. Anyway, so this is what he's talking about here. He plays a song called White Summer, and then it goes into Black Mountainside, which is just, for all intents and purposes, this is Jimmy Page's little guitar solo. Page doesn't do Dazed and Confused. He says he isn't anymore, but he does do a similar no-name song in which he bows his guitar. Now, that's the other thing that's interesting about this, because that used to be kind of a staple in the concerts was Dazed and Confused, and of course, in the big middle part, he would do the thing he was famous for, is he'd take a violin bow and he'd go do it on the strings, and it gave this really kind of screechy, fascinating, really amazing sound. What he started doing was, rather than playing that song, he would go into this piece that included him playing the bow. But it also, you can see examples of this online. It was coupled with Jimmy Page playing a theremin. Now, I should get it. We actually have a theremin here in the studio, and it's this fascinating quote instrument. It was kind of one of the original electronic instruments, and it's played by. It's an instrument you don't actually touch. It's played by moving your hands closer and further away from these different. I don't know how to describe it. You'd have to see it, but it has these. It has something that looks like an antenna, and then another thing that looks like a loop. And as you move your hand close and further away from these things, one of them makes the pitch go higher and lower, and another one adjusts the volume, makes it quieter and louder. And so part of this guitar solo that he introduced, where he would do his guitar with the bow, he also had a theremin on stage, just a bizarre instrument, and it fit really nicely with what Jimmy Page was doing with the bow on the guitar. Anyway, I just wanted to put that in context so you knew what we were talking about there. In Drama of Light and Smoke, green laser lights cage him with smoke created from dry ice. It's a scene from 2001. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that article. Again, it's just kind of it's one of those things that kind of gives you a day in the life. You know, get to see these little things about what they're doing during their tour, how they would base themselves in a certain city, and just that idea of seeing them go see Bad Company in concert, you know, while they're on tour themselves. Just kind of really interesting stuff. Hey, anyway, if you don't follow the channel, please follow the channel, like the video. If you saw them during this time and you saw this new thing that he did with the theremin and the bow on the guitar, putting those two things together, I'd love to hear about that stuff. The people on this channel leave the coolest concert stories about having seen so many of these bands, and especially the Led Zeppelin stuff and Black Sabbath. I mean, we have so many great comments. I love reading this stuff. And so please, if you've had that experience, leave that in the comments. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.